Hello, everyone. Hi, good afternoon. So, today we have a great session for you guys. It's about food photography. And the speaker we have is Kulsum Kunwa. She's a professional food photographer. Kulsum's page on Instagram has about 35,000 followers, and the images are stunning. Of course, we'll share her profile with you guys so you can see for yourself. Today, she'll take you through the basics of capturing food on your camera and putting it up on your social media. So without taking much of your time, I'll hand this over to Kulsum.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kulsum. As Ishita told me, I'm a food photographer. Have been doing this for nearly, let me start my screen. I've been nearly doing this for 10 years. The reason I'm really excited about this session specifically is because I started exactly as where you guys are. I was a cook who was very passionate about cooking. I wanted to actually become a chef. And while I thought I want to be a chef, I realized that I need to know some things about food photography. And while exploring food photography so that the food that I'm cooking looks decent for camera or for the places which was basically my blog where I was putting my photos, is where I realized that I have a passion for food photography more than for food itself. So there I was, dropped all my plan to go to culinary school and actually started food photography. So that's why I think this class and this session is going to be perfect, because I really, really understand where you guys are at and what you're like. I understand what good food photography can do for you guys, and I'm excited to share some of that with you today. So to run you through some basics, I have been doing food photography, as I mentioned, for nearly 10 years. Since then, started from someone who knows nothing about camera. And then now I shoot for some major leading international brands like Costa or Applebee's or Taco, Pizza Hut, even in Middle East, like one of the biggest market in Middle East where I stay currently in Kuwait is actually restaurant businesses. And I've shot for nearly 100, more than 100 restaurants in Middle East. I have done cover books, cookbooks, shot the book for, the cover image for Padma Lakshmi's book. So, I mean, I have had my great moments in this career, and being a professional food photographer who didn't really start off as being a professional or studied professionally, I wanted to run you guys through why and how you can create images that can help you with your business, whether you are cooking for as a home business, or are you running as a restaurant, or you plan to just share your skills and become a consultant with restaurants. There are so many attributes of how you can use food photography to create a successful business. I'm just going to run you through some of my work. So obviously I want you to understand, because every photographer has a certain style and a certain way of working, and I hope that you can find something that inspires you with these images, to see how different food can be photographed, what are the different angles they are shot at, how food is made to look the way it is. One of the biggest things that people ask me is like, okay, I'm a cook. Why do I need to take good photos? My talent is in cooking. And then my number one reason is, how many accounts or how many people do you follow, not only on Instagram, but whether it's a website or whether it's even on TV. The thing that we do and we always want is to look at beautiful photos, and that's the way you get tempted to eat good food. So if you want people to actually view your food and feel tempted to actually order it or make with you, you have to take the best looking photo for them. Okay, so the first thing that I want to discuss with you guys is an extension to what I've already said, is why you need good food photos. Because like I said, a lot of people come to me, they'll say, I'm not great at it. Why do I need to learn it? It's like another field altogether, but is it important enough for me to learn? I don't think as food business, you need to be a professional food photographer. Of course, that's what we are for. But the most important thing is to create decent photos. You cannot, and I remember this from my personal experience, you can have the best of recipes and post it, and nobody is going to have a look at it, and nobody is going to feel tempted to look at it. So for foodies, or people who are into the blogging world or the cooking world or want to be chefs, it's very important that you know how to take decent photos of your food. I highly I mean, I always feel very, when people tell me that this is so hard, it doesn't have to be so hard. You don't have to take the most complicated food photos. You're not a food photographer, but I will run you through how to take decent photos of your food. Once people see good photos, it's very, the reach automatically becomes much wider. When I was starting to run a blog, I had such a small reach, and then the blog eventually grew, and then for those of you, I don't know if you've ever been into, I used to run the blog called journeykitchen.com. And then eventually I came on Instagram, and my photos improved drastically. The reach became so worldwide. Like, I was no longer just targeting the Middle Eastern market or India, or, I got work and brands that approached me from around the world. So you are not only reaching your own viewer, whether you are trying to make them cook from you or order from you, you're also reaching other brands, because today's world is totally visually driven, and marketers are looking for content creators who are good at this, who are also good at recipes, and who are also good at cooking, but also can take decent photos so that they are happy to share them. And it's going to bring you much more brands and markets than you can ever imagine. And you are no longer just restricted by your area, which is one of the best things about food photography. One of the key things in creating a visual identity for a brand is consistency and cohesiveness. I I feel, especially as someone who's just starting to create photos, or is not a professional food photographer but wants good photos of their food, one thing that you need to keep in mind is to keep your photo consistent and cohesive. They should look like it is you, or you as a brand. One of the things that I see is like, especially when you're starting off, you do, of course, try different things until you figure out what is more close to you, what is closer to your personality. Because in my opinion, photography is an extension of yourself. It is the way you see things, and you want to produce it. But while building a social media account, consistency in food photography, like a similar style or a similar background or a similar kind of color tone or a similar color editing, is going to make you recognizable, because you are the brand. You as a chef or a cook are the brand, but your photography is your impression. So you are creating an impression every time you post a photo. People should see that photo, and even if it's the most simplest of images, they should feel like they know who that image comes from. And I think that is where you are starting to build on a brand, even without, you don't have to put your logo everywhere on the image to say this is your brand or your work. I feel that your photo should be so personal and so personalized in a way that it can tell your story without you having to scream it. So that's one of the reasons I never put a watermark. I'm not saying it's a right or wrong thing, but I personally think that the photo itself is a big way of saying who are you as a photographer. I just wanted to run you through some brands I work with or my own personal work, and you will see there is a consistency in the way they have been photographed. So every time that the client or the brand, whether you're a restaurant or whether you're a home cook, when you're posting them, it all looks cohesive. It looks like it came from the same place. You don't want them to be drastically different from each other and make them look, they might be beautiful images, but they don't talk about you as one person. So if you will see here in this image, we started off this with, based on the aesthetic of the person who was, this is actually a restaurant, and the aesthetic of the restaurant was very gray, very minimal, but also a lot of fun food and colorful food. So that's what we tried to portray from the photography. You'll see that I use the same color tones and colors throughout the photography. And when you start posting this on Instagram as a consistent brand, people just recognize the brand as it is. Here are some other examples. You don't have to stick to someone's style or one particular style. You can do things, you can be creative with it, but um, continue with that. Like, make sure that you keep working on it. Photography is not a one day thing, of course. You need to work on it for years and years to master it, but it's not very difficult to have a basic color tone and basic food photography. Right now, for example, here the vibe on the right, what you see is a very colorful brand. So that's how we use the color, kept it consistent all throughout the branding. The other is an Italian place, so the food is more focused on cheese and pasta and those kind of photography. So you as someone starting off need to assess what you want to portray as your brand to be. This can come from your logo or your branding or the place you run or your personality, depending on how big your brand is. And you need to find that. Of course, me saying that find it is easy, actually finding it is not as easy. Like, you don't know what you really like until you have been doing it for a while. What few things that I think really, really help in finding your personal style, I'll run you them. I actually didn't have a slide on this, but I think it's going to be an important aspect to talk about, is how do you find your style? One thing that you do is create mood boards. Keep collecting photos that inspire you, that you like, photos that make you feel like you want to eat it, or photos that make you feel like, different photos have a different aim. So pick photos that really inspire you, especially when you're starting out. You might find that you're collecting photos which are very, very different from each other. Don't be scared of that. When you're collecting, you keep collecting photos and then you put them next to each other and then start looking at it with more interest, that, okay, this is better than this. I feel like this is more me. That kind of research into your brand will really help you to create some visuals for yourself, which are more cohesive and more in line with your own branding. It is a long process. Start simple is always my number one suggestion to anyone, whether you're starting off as a food blogger or a chef or a home cook, that start off as simple as possible. A lot of times I've seen people that when they see food photographers like myself or other food photographers' photographs, they start emulating that at the same level. And you can't do that, because then it complicates. Those are people who are very accomplished and have been doing it, so they know a lot more than you do. So instead of finding like the most difficult thing to emulate, find something really, really simple, so that you start off with and then you build on it. I just wanted to show you some other brands that I work with and how there are different styles of food photography as well. There's no one right style of taking photos. It is more about what speaks to you the most, and essentially when you keep doing that over a period of time, it's gonna represent you. So one of the key things, I mean, I know I've said it already, but if you're starting a career in food, whether there are so many ways now we do it, you really, really have to get serious about food photography. There is no other way around it. Whether you want to write for magazines, or whether you want to pitch to restaurants, or whether you want to be a food blogger, or whether you want to be a home chef, starting business from home, you need to make sure that you can create photos that are good. So having said all that about food, so now you have heard all that about food photography, and you need to really have good images, and I'm sure I hope nobody is debating that. But where do you start? Like, where do you start? There is so much now. I always tell people that we are in a world of so much information that we don't know where to start. It only becomes more and more difficult to find places to start. And where do you start? It's often overwhelming. One of the key things, of course, there are 4 things you basically need for food photography. One is an equipment to take the photo of. So you need a camera. Now, the camera itself doesn't have to be a fancy camera. I have seen some outstanding work people are doing with just smartphones. So depending on where you are starting in your business, invest, or at least start with some kind of camera, whether it's a phone camera, whether it's a DSLR, whether it is an SLR. you need something that can create good pixels. Nowadays, even phones do that so well. So you need obviously a camera. Second most important thing for food photography or any photography is light, because essentially a camera is only a black box, and the way it understands the scene is through light. So based on what light comes in is how the camera reads your photography. So you need light, that's quite basic. And then you need some props, beautiful plates. And I'm going to run you through more in detail, and then we'll obviously have a question and answer session where, based on your assessment, you can ask me some questions as well. But this is roughly what we are going to be talking about. So you need props. Props are basically anything that helps you enhance your food. So that could be just plates, it could be backgrounds, it could be, actually backgrounds are also props. So it could be napkins, it could be cutlery, but it could be nothing. You can actually be plating right on a whiteboard. So there are so many things that can be called props, but essentially props in food photography would mean things that go along with your food. So that's a plate, a cutlery, a napkin, flowers, depending on your style. That could be, there is so much that you can consider prop in food photography. And the most important thing is a background. Background is basically what you would put your food on. Essentially, when we serve food, we put it on a table. So the background that we're going to use is actually mimic a table. Now, of course, for food photography, you don't need to really have a table. You could have a plain surface and pretend it's a table. So that's the idea behind it, that you need a background that serves as a table. You could, if you have an interesting looking table, it was also, obviously, you could use that as well. Okay, so in general, the first thing when you are into photography, now whatever I'm going to explain is gonna apply to camera and DSLR. So you don't need to be limited. If you don't have a good camera, don't feel limited. The same principles of light works everywhere, whether it's any kind of gadget that you have. One of the key things with photography is light, right? You need light, and light is what makes the picture. One of the cheapest and the free source of light is sun. As we go more into the slides, I'll show you the easiest setup that you can do, especially when you're starting off. But the idea that you need to invest a lot to get into food photography is not true. When I started, I had semi DSLR, which is an SLR, which was an SLR, and then I just used natural light I used a natural light to shoot actually 2 cookbooks until I shifted into artificial light. And though I use a lot of artificial light now versus natural light. Key thing, now if you have seen other photographers, whether you have seen portrait photographers or lifestyle photographers, or if you have seen fashion photography, you would see that there are huge lights, and there is light here and there's light there, and there's so much complicated gear around to make the photo work. But the good thing about food photography is that you don't really need much of equipment. You really just need one major light source. Now, whether based on what your skill level is, you could be a natural light photographer or an artificial light photographer. You need just one nice window. In fact, you don't even need a very big window. You can use a small window as well, of course. Now, if you get into the physics of light, small light, large light, dark light, bright light, cloudy light, or a hard light, soft light, each light creates a different result. Like if you are out in the sun, or you are at home and you see how the light streams through your window on a daily basis, you would see that light acts differently throughout the day. The color of the light is different during the day. The color of the light is different in the evening. The light is harder when the sun is streaming through your window, then it gets softer. So once you understand and start understanding how the light works, you will also start understanding how photography works. So one of the easiest way of doing food photography is actually soft light, because what soft light does is basically makes your food and the colors pop. And when you're doing food photography, that's what everyone is behind. You want the colors to be vibrant, you want them to look tempting, you want easy on the eye kind of imagery, which just is all about the food. So one of the main thing with light and food photography specifically is you need nice diffuse light. Of course, we are going to get to the part, how do you get nice diffuse light, in a bit. I have roughly, for, again, as I mentioned, you don't need to have complicated stuff. For the longest time, I just used thin sheer curtains as diffuser. We're going to get back to that. You want a cloudy day instead of a sunny day. I've been on shoots where people would be like, oh, it's such a cloudy day today, how are we going to shoot? And I'm like, cloudy day is your best friend, because that means basically the sun is your light source and clouds are your diffuser. The light is passing through the clouds and reaching you. So you already have a diffused light rather than you trying to make it diffused. So that's one of the things with light and food photography. If you have a decent size window and you get some kind of diffused light in your apartment or your house, which should be the case, then you already have, I would say, 70% of what is required for food photography. And then one of the, I'm going to cover now, please keep in mind that photography is such a complicated subject, but what I'm trying to aim at is to make you understand the basics of food photography, and that you can take a good image of your food where the food is the hero. So anyway, the next most important thing is the composition. I've seen, like I had mentioned earlier, that there are photographers, you try to emulate photographers and their compositions, but one of the best and the easiest way actually to create a good photograph is to have a basically good background and a good plate and just shoot the plate. That's your, you can't go wrong with like a good light, a soft diffuse light, a neutral background, and a centered plate. Let me go back to one of the client photos that I was working with, and I will show you what I meant. So if you even look here, there is this very small, very small, it's a small space. There's only the plating that's standing out. When you see here, there are plates, it's all about the plate. So you choose a neutral background and put your plate centered, and you take, if your food is itself the hero of your photography, then that works perfectly well. And you don't need to worry about creating complicated compositions. I have seen that a lot of people make the compositions or their photos very, very busy. And that, especially as a food business, is going to take away attention from your hero, which is the food. So you want to keep it as simple, especially when you're beginning. So, and once you feel like your skill levels are adding up or you're doing better, you start introducing more props, you start introducing more interesting elements in your frame. But as a start off, start with a simple plate. And this is probably my number one recommendation, because I see new photographers or even new bloggers or new home chefs doing so much in a frame. There's a plant and there is the spices, and there are all the spices that are flowing on the surface. There is no right and wrong, of course. I mean, that if that's your thing, you do you. But if you're trying to work up, just like anything in life, you have to start simple and then build on it. So that's about composition. Again, now styling is, I think I get the most questions even on my Instagram, and I get questions on styling all the time. How do you style your food for the camera? One thing that you have to keep in mind as you as a cook or a chef, are styling, when you're styling or when you're taking a photo, it's not the same as actually serving the food. There is a thin line of difference between the two. You need to understand that difference, why the camera. Now, when I look at a dish with our bare eyes, we are looking at a 3D dish, right? We can see it from all its sides, we can turn it around, we see all aspects of it. But a camera actually captures only 2D, right? So you're only seeing one face of the photo. Now, how the aim of a food photographer or taking a food photo is actually to make that 2D feel more 3D. That's actually the aim of photography, that you have something that's still and that's a 2D, but you give it depth and dimension to make it feel more, more relatable, that you people feel like they want to just grab it out of the screen. So that's your idea. But having said that, you have to keep in mind that you're working with the 2D aspect of a screen. So, a lot of times, like when chefs on sets on our restaurants, when bring food, they are looking at food on a 3D aspect, because he would make sure that his plate is, perfect from here. And then, he wants to spread out certain things. And I'm like, from the camera's perspective, you need to look at things a bit differently. You need more centered stuff. You need that your hero dish is not spread out. A lot of times you would see that there are main dishes that are covered with greens, or there is a garnish of microgreens, for example. And then how do I see the hero? Like, how do I see what's the main selling point of this dish? So you need to think about the 2D version of your dish rather than the 3D when you're shooting things. One of the thing with food is, like, especially our Indian food. That Indian food is most of the time brown. It is meant to be generally with dense colors, or not to say that can't be photographed beautifully, but it does make you do come up with special set of challenges when you are dealing with food that is more ethical, like Indian food. Just say, agar aap dekhein, if you're shooting for American brands or European brands, they have so much color on their plate. They have they have this vegetable on the side and this vegetable on the side. And it kind of I mean, personally, as someone who's been doing this for 10 years, I shoot a lot of Arabic and Indian food, and they are definitely much harder to use than to shoot than other food. So how do we bring that color into our in our food? Like, how do you make Indian food more tempting? One of the things that I do, I mean, we are running into styling. I'll take up specific questions on certain food types if you want to have tips on how to style them. But I'll cover stuff that comes to my mind. For example, curries. Just say, you take aloo tomato ki sabzi. How do you, when we cook it, it's in a kadai, it's all coated, it's all well coated, and then you can hardly see the peas and hardly see the potatoes or any other vegetable for that matter. One of the things you do is you cook your veggies, you steam them, and you put them separately, and then you cook your curry, and then in the end, when you're shooting it, the semi-cooked veggies are what you add into your dish. And then, so that the greens from the peas and the texture of the potato actually stands out. The trick is actually, the trick of a food stylist is to make sure that still the food doesn't look fake. So you still have to add those raw ingredients, semi-raw ingredients, and make them look like an actual curry, but you still get that vibrancy of color. So those are the tricks that you need to learn to make sure that your food looks interesting. Undercook everything. Generally, I mean, if whether it's veggies, or especially, a lot of our food like sabzi or even green veggies, we cook them to death. You want to undercook that. Like, just say if you're doing a spinach curry, for example, you don't want, it's not photogenic to look at a very dark green, murky looking, muddy looking spinach. So you undercook it, make the color vibrant. I'm a big believer of not faking it with color, but you can definitely work around it. Bring out whatever elements are important in a dish. Just say, if you're shooting, say, let's say you're shooting mixed, for like a chicken dish, for example, or a chicken curry. You want to remove some of those pieces beforehand, the good looking ones, and then place them on top or on the center of the dish. Sometimes you take a bowl and then you invert a bowl inside so that your food doesn't sink inside and stays on top of your food. So there are so many such tricks that you have to follow for food to be interesting. A lot of times people think that food photography is the cook brings the food and you take the photo. It's not like that. There's so much work behind it. Like, you change the light based on your food, you change the styling. One of the other important aspects of styling is garnishing. um, you know uh, I've seen that our food, especially Indian food, we bring so much, we put coriander on everything, but there are still so many other ways of making our garnishes interesting. Jaise tadka ho gaya, ya aap, you put in fresh green chilies, or we always have a side of some kind of salad. If you do, you place it with some kind of salad on the side, which is like I mean, for us, it's always a bit of cucumber or carrot on the side. So you need, if you feel like your frame is too darkened by the way the food is, you can introduce some colors in the frame, but do it in a way which does justice to the dish. Like, you don't bring in food just for the heck of it. Then you're not being true to your story or the story you're trying to sell. Because essentially all this that we are talking about, food photography, is actually storytelling. You are trying to tell a story with your food, and you don't want to make fake stories, right? So you don't just put a salad next to your sabzi when it's not the usual way of eating. But there are so many other ways you can work around it. Of course, if ever, if you go to my Instagram feed, I share a lot of tips. So the idea with my Instagram is every post, I share some tips on doing certain things based on the photo I'm posting. So if you're interested in more in-depth stuff, you can definitely be there. But be authentic. Like, be authentic in the way you do your food, because especially with our food, I know it's a bit hard to shoot it. So people try to not be authentic, but I can tell you that you can do it. Just say, there are things like ghee on the side, or do we have carbs on the side? Use rice or roti or paratha or naan, whatever that is, to tell the story of your food, like how you're eating it. It's a home-based dish, it's a restaurant, because you can evoke so many emotions by this subtle additions in your picture. So that's about styling. Okay, now equipment. I know this is probably the most daunting of all things. Because we as photographers, there's a saying that you can never be rich as a photographer. That's because photographers are always buying equipment. There's always new equipment coming in, and you're always buying new stuff. But having said that, you don't need too much to actually have good photos. In fact, some of my favorite photographers use very basic equipment, and they just use natural light, and I feel like their photos are the best. So nearly for 5 years of my career, and I've been working for 10 years. So the first 5 years, like I mentioned earlier, I only used natural light. I had one camera, one lens, one tripod, and few phone calls. So this is exactly what I've written here, is exactly what I have had for 5 years as a career in food photography, not just someone. So I have shot with this stuff. I've shot restaurants, I've shot cookbooks, I've shot campaigns. If you have a smartphone, and nowadays, as I mentioned, smartphones are really good. So you can totally use a smartphone or get a DSLR. Now, a 50 lens, if you're familiar with how food photography works, basically a 50 lens is the most closest to how our eye sees. So a tripod really allows you to work on your composition and on your food, especially if when you're starting off, you generally are working on multiple aspects. You're doing the food styling, you're cooking the food, you're plating the food, you're also playing around with the composition, you're doing so many things that you don't really want to be holding the camera all the time and then going back. And then you had one good photo and you don't know how to go back to it. So I feel that a tripod definitely makes life a lot easier. Having said that, not that you need it to get good photos, but it definitely helps. And if you are doing this on regular basis, and when I was blogging, I used to create dishes every few days. I'm sorry, my light just went off. I'm just gonna switch that on. Okay, so foam codes are basically white and black boards which help you to manipulate light. Now, when I say manipulate light, what do you mean? When we are so we are working with light, right? And light has a certain power. Like kabhi aapko bahut, some days you're having very bright light and some days you're having very, very muted light. So what foams are doing is there is a blackboard and there's a whiteboard. So what whiteboards, if you go back to the principles of light, when light hits something white, it will reflect back, right? It reflects the light back on your set. And then the opposite with black. When you use a black foam board or a black curtain, for example, when light hits your set, the black will absorb some of that light. So I can run you through the details of how this can work. You guys should be able to see me. Yeah. So basically these are foam cores. You see this one is a black one. This is the white one. You put them on your sets. When you want more light on your set is when you use white. And when you want less light, especially for like dark and moody photography, is when you would actually use, you want to use a black to absorb light, basically. I recommend that when you are starting off, find a space where you can have a fixed space. I know this could be limiting. मतलब कुछ लोगों के पास शायद इतनी जगह ना हो या घर, your home is smaller. I know the pain of setting and unsetting things. It takes a part of your creativity away. But if you have to do it, you have to do it. But like अगर आप रोज ही आपका tripod खोलेंगे and every day you are, setting up everything, it takes so much more time. And in today's world where we are really looking to do things faster, if you have a fixed space, it really makes life easy. Now, you do need a window. You don't necessarily need a very large window, but a small, the advantage of a large window is large you can make it smaller, but a smaller window you can't make it larger. You can use a large window and then cut out some lights if you want by putting curtains. You have black foam boards, but if you have a small window, you can't do that. Having said that, small windows actually create the most dramatic, nice light. So if you're into dark and moody photography, actually small window would be exactly what you need. For mostly to understand light, there are two ways. Let me go to this photo and then I think it would be easier to explain. So you see there is this large window. It's actually a balcony door that's behind in the first image. You see that's a very large window. Light source. And if you will see on the board that I have placed, you will see that the light is actually very sharp. It's a sunlight. It's sharp rays of sunlight that are falling on my board. Now, this was my setup for the first 5 years of my life as a food photographer. Now, taking this from here is how you start manipulating the light. Aapke paas light hai, you have a board, you have a stand. Now, if you look at the stand, you try to find a tripod stand which can go overhead, because there are certain angles in food photography which you would see repetitively. Basically, there are three angles. One is called a 90-degree angle. One is called a 45-degree angle. And the way my tripod is mounted and my camera, if you can see, is mounted, is actually called a top shot, or it's called an overhead shot. These are, of course, there are many in-between shots, but these are the main three shots that you would see in food photography. So when the light is coming in from the window and my camera is actually parallel to the light source, is what you call a side light. So right now, what you see on your screen is how my camera is mounted as a side light. Now, whatever food I will keep on that board it's said that it's going to be shot at a side light, because a lot of time people ask me, okay, what does a side light mean? When your camera is parallel to the light is when it is a side light. Now, if you will see that on the second photo here, I diffuse the light. Now you see the light is much softer. You don't see that sharp shadow on the board because I diffuse the light. Now, this is what you are looking for good food photography. You see that I have a small curtain sheer, which was, I think, is a quarter of a stop. Anyway, don't worry about quarter of a stop, but basically it's a thin, patla sheer hair. So it didn't block enough light. So then I used a round diffuser, again, not a very expensive equipment. Iski jagah pe you can use a thicker curtain, or you can a thicker sheer, basically. Basically what you're trying to do is soften the light that's coming in. So if you see in the second image, I have softened the light, and you can create amazing images just doing that. Now, someone asked, where do you place this foam core boards? If this is your light source, like where the light is coming in from, and your camera is parallel, then the other side of the camera, of the light, where the light is coming in, is where you would put your foam core. I mean, of course, you can surround it by foam core. There are so many complicated ways of, I mean, you can talk so much more about it, but in the most basic form, if you keep the white foam board parallel to the setup, then you will bounce some light into it. So basically, this is your light source, this is your camera, and this is your foam board. So when the light hits the foam core will reflect back some of that light and fill your light. And this works particularly well for light and air images. Ab jaise agar a blackboard, if you put a blackboard here, your light source is here, your food is here, light hits the food, and it also hits this, but this will absorb the light because it's black, and it will create deeper shadows, which is very helpful for dark and moody photography. So that's the basics of how foam core is basically used. Let me go back. Okay, so there are, in terms of lighting, there are two main ways of lighting in food photography. One is called backlight, and one is called side light. Abhi jaise when I explained that when your camera is parallel to the light is called a side light, and how I have shot this photo, मैंने जिस angle से ये photo लिया हुआ है, is called a backlight. So basically, I'm shooting it against the light. It's called a backlight. The light is coming from the back, the camera is here, and I'm shooting against it. That's called a backlight. Side light is, again, when it's parallel. One of the easiest and one of the short way of getting decent photos for food photography is side light, because side light hits the food from the side and illuminates the main parts of the food, bringing out nice contrast, nice colors. So again, if all fails, you can always depend on a side light. Backlight is a little more complicated to work with. It works very well for drinks. If you're into drinks or shooting drinks, what happens is when light hits food from the back, when light hits the glass from the back, it brings the shine in your drinks. But for most of these situations, I would think that side light works perfectly for everything. Okay, basic prop and styling kit. Now, for the longest part, when I was food blogging and not a professional food photographer, but even as a professional food photographer, I do my own styling. I do hire stylists when required, but you, even as a photographer, as a as a food blogger or chef, you still need a decent amount of props and styling hacks in your box so that you can pull off any situation well. Now, one of the most basic props that I would recommend to everyone is white plates and white bowls and white pinch bowls. I have some here. Let me show you. So the key thing is that, guys, if you can see, is you want some basic plates. White is your safest color to be with, but also that you need them to be matte. You don't want to be shooting, of course, as photographer, I'm often shooting glossy things, but if you're starting out and don't really have much experience as a food photographer, matte plates are easiest because you will not have those shiny reflections when light hits it. Like right now, the light is hitting it from the side, and because it's a matte plate, you won't have very distracting reflections. But if it was a shiny plate with a gloss on top, it's going to have distracting reflections here, making your distracting from your food. So you do need small, white plates, or, subtle texture is beautiful. You don't need to buy something. The starting point would be matte white plates, but then if you're starting to build your set, try to look for subtle texture on your props. You don't want very, very distracting textures. You want very subtle textures. So that's because, remember, in food photography, the food is the hero. So everything should complement your food, bring out the food rather than distracting from the food. And that's one of the main reasons you use matte cutlery and matte plates and stuff, so that there is no shine and no reflections, or have minimum shines and reflections, so that the highlights on the food stands out the more. So you need, I would say it is a must have to have matte plates and bowls. Pinch bowls are basically these small pinch bowls. Sometimes your composition needs just a tiny bit of extra thing. So, if you're putting some chutney or a garnish or a dip, these come really handy. They really help to build. Better compositions. So yeah, and that's also very true of cutlery. There is nothing worse than to be having beautifully plated dish, and then you have this very shiny silver cutlery, which is going to take all the attention, and it's reflecting, and it hits your eye, and it's all very, very distracting. So as you can make out from what I've been saying, the key is to not have distractions in your food photos, not distractions which are not appealing. So you want to use everything that is muted. So cutlery, if you have shiny cutlery, there's usually a spray called dulling spray. Obviously, your cutlery won't be, you can't use them to eat anymore once you spray them. But if you have if you want to use this often, it's a good thing to do is to spray them with they're called dulling sprays, and you spray them with dulling spray and they don't have that shine. But of course, you also get non-glossy cutlery in the market. So those are the things to look out for. You will see a lot of use of napkin in food photography. Also, because they are more inviting. It makes you feel like you're on a table. So you want to look for neutral colors in cutlery, or whether it's in plates or in napkins or in your backgrounds. You do want to look for neutral colors, dull colors. Of course, having said that, I want to say that because you will see some of my photographs have very popping colors. I'm talking about a photo where you really just want food to stand out. And from the comment section, I'm just going to pick up that whatever I'm saying obviously also applies to videography. You need to do the same things. You need a good composition. You need to undercook your food for food video. Unless, there are different styles of videography. So it really depends. But if it is a very food-centric video where, you're trying to show food in the best light, you obviously follow all of this also in videography. The idea is to, like I said, use neutral. So one of the best colors that work with food is white, gray, or black. These are the most neutral colors if you want the food to pop. Again, there is so much range in the types of whites and type of gray and type of black. Find something that is easy for you to access, easy for you to make. You can make your own backgrounds. If you go on my Instagram, I have some IGTV on how to make your own backgrounds. So if you are looking to make your own background, you can definitely do that. On my IGTV, you will find that I have made this background. It's partly white and gray, which is a basic background that works well for most kind of food. So you can find details of how this was made on my IGTV if you go there. But yeah, you can make your own backgrounds as well. You don't need to invest so much. Whether you are a restaurant or whether you're a business or what kind of food business you are, in the beginning, try to minimize, because see, food photographers, it's not cheap to hire a food photographer. And if you have the time and space, you do want to try and invest in all these things and invest your time in doing things. And then it will also help you when you are hiring people in future to know what you really want and not guessing, because you have already done it yourself. So You can look up these boards. I'm going to show you some other boards that I have. This is this is this is a black surface. As you can see, there is very subtle. This is actually a metal. It used to be a baking tray. I got it from a baker. But you can see that it has subtle texture. You don't want something with a lot of texture, because then again, remember our key is to keep the focus on the food. So the minute you add something that is too textured, then your eyes will automatically go on the texture rather than food. So you want to avoid that. So this is like a plain black surface with a subtle texture. If you are into dark and moody, this kind of black surface is kind of key to creating dark and moody photos. For dark and moody photos specifically, because I get probably the most questions on dark and moody. You want dark and moody props. I know I said white plates and bowls, which also work for dark and moody. But if you're into dark and moody photography, you do need darker props. You need, instead of white plates and bowls, you need more dark black plates and bowls. And again, you do want to stick with matte texture, so you are able to create photos without creating distractions. And then one of the most basic and probably most used surface in my food photography is this. Oops, sorry. This is heavy, the metal one. Okay, so I'm back. So this one is like a very subtle gray, white, more gray than white. The other one that I showed you was more white and less gray. This is more gray. And this is the kind of background that is also very universal, works for everything. It's basically, the idea is to replicate some kind of concrete. So you need to, and then there is also this darker shade of gray behind it. For those of you who are interested in making these, you can go to my IGTV. There's a lot of discussion on what kind of material I use and what kind of paint I use. So yeah.
Nikhat is asking an interesting question. To get good photos, does one also need to learn good food plating?
Yes, I would say yes. Essentially, again, you're eating with your eyes, your plating needs to be nice. Now, plating per se can mean different things. Are we talking about fine dine plating? Because agar aap fine dine level ke chef ho, and that's what you pursue, then obviously that's the kind of plating. Are you selling homemade food? So then your plating needs to be rustic, but still photogenic. When you're cooking at home in a kadhai or whatever, you just mix things up. I mean, that's how I serve my kids and my family, is just pour the food right out of the kadai, right? I don't bother about making it look good for them on the table, which I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but anyway. But when I'm taking a photo, I definitely want even that kadai to look very photogenic. Even if I'm cooking it in a cooking pot, I'm going to pick up the ingredients from that, put it on top, garnish it, maybe have a tadka on top. So you definitely, whatever be your genre, whether you're trying to create a homey feel, a chef feel, or, you do want plate to, I mean, even for us, right? We go to a restaurant, we are not going to enjoy something is not plated well. So you're doing just that. You need to provide your viewer with something that would interest them and they find tempting.
Okay, so Deepthi Bhatt is asking, can you share tips on editing and what are points that we need to keep in mind while we edit our images?
Okay, that's a good question. You would see a lot of edit, and I do a lot of before and after and editing videos on my Instagram, but to keep it short here, see, food, fashion mein, when we do fashion and when we do other kind of photography, editing is a big part of the shoot. Like, you already know where you want to reach, and that there are extreme changes in color and skin tones and a lot of those. For food, because ultimately aapko, we are showing the food the way it should be. You can't make banana look red, right? It's people know it's yellow, but in fashion you can make the red dress green and nobody would know. So for food, you want to be as close to original as possible. Having said that, a lot of edit in food photography is about bringing out the contrast or making the food or the color pop, or making the adjustments in shadows and highlights, कि आपकी light कहाँ पे ज़्यादा होगी, कहाँ पे कम होगी, those kind of adjustments, rather than trying to change the whole, it's not as advanced as trying to change the color of the food completely. There can be saturation, you can increase the vibrance of color. So I would suggest that if you are starting off into editing in food, first of all, whatever application you're using, whether it's Lightroom or Photoshop, learn those softwares very well. And one of the best way to learn these softwares is actually their own websites and their blog and their forums. So don't feel like you can always go them and bother them with questions. That's one of the things I used to do. But also, whatever adjustments you do, start very small adjustments. Like, you don't want to pull that slider on extreme ends. You want to start like 1.2 point, okay, I'm pushing the contrast just a bit, or let me try and expose this a little bit. The minute I have seen people on my workshops, on my in participating workshops, that people would try and do something dramatic, and then it starts looking ugly, and they're like, no, I can't edit. They get scared of the edit. It's because you're taking it too far, and you can't take it too far with food photography.
A lot of questions about thumbnails, how to create them, how to, out of your pictures, how to choose a thumbnail and stuff like that. What would you say about that?
I believe they're talking about thumbnails for a video, right?
Yeah, for a video.
So I recommend that once you're done with your video, then you take a proper food photo of your video, rather than taking clips from the video itself. Rather than taking stills from your video, you actually do a food photo right after your video is done, and use that as your thumbnail, because essentially a video works in moving frames, and a still photo works in one frame. I think you can get the best out of a thumbnail when it is a still photograph, rather than just picking a random thumbnail from your video, because again, there might be movement in that clip, and then there might be a bit of blur. If you have a sharp image, it's always going to be the best thumbnail you can use.
So both Manjira Day and Pooja Shilawat are asking about apps and softwares for editing photos. I don't know if you can mention them, but if you can,
yeah,
please.
of course. So the most common editing software with food photographers is Lightroom. I use Lightroom and Capture One. Capture One is more, honestly, most apps have the same features. People also use just Photoshop as well. The idea why I use Capture One the most is because of my on location work. So I shoot a lot on locations. So I need a lot of, I need a good tethering app. Now, tethering is when you are connected with your laptop while you're shooting with your camera. So as soon as you shoot the photo, you can see it on your laptop or whatever device you're connected to. So for me as a professional, that's a very important aspect, because the client is also a viewer of the photo. So for me, that aspect of it is important. That's why I use Capture One, because it has a better tethering system than Lightroom. But the most common usage is Lightroom. Capture One is slightly more expensive. Lightroom is good because Adobe then has other applications as well which you can use, which is Photoshop, and so you can get a better deal there if you want to. I don't believe that one app makes your photos better than the other. You can actually just take your photos nowadays and use Lightroom on your mobile. Lightroom has a mobile application as well, which is free. So you can just take in your photos and shoot them and edit them on Lightroom. And there are so many other apps, Snapseed, Vesco, those kind of apps are now really good for editing, especially if you're just using the photos for online editing, where you don't have to, zoom into each aspect of it, or it's not getting on a bus or a billboard, then you don't really have to worry much about it. Having said that, I highly recommend that you shoot your photos in RAW format. When you shoot via your camera, even on your phone nowadays, like most of the phones have an option of shooting RAW and JPEG. So these are formats of photos. JPEG is like a compressed version of photos, and RAW is a raw image, which if you shoot in RAW, it becomes much easier to edit them. because it has more pixels and it has more data in it. So when you edit them, you can recover more color and you can recover more contrast and shadow and whatever edit you're doing. So make sure to shoot on RAW in whatever editing app you use.
Okay. Ruchika Singh is asking, how can we decide the cutlery and crockery for taking the pictures? For Indian food, should we consider Indian vessels like kadhai or something like that?
Yes, of course. You very much should. I think that again come back to the idea of storytelling. If you're trying to portray an Indian kitchen and an Indian atmosphere, of course, go ahead and use Indian wear. Having said that, what kind of color and props to use is also something that I get asked very, very often. If you're just starting off and you really are, don't have a comprehensive understanding of colors and how to mix colors, I would say start white, like white plates, white bowls, everything looks basically good in white. There's no two ways about it. The other thing is think of colors and your food as if you're going out and you want to dress up. Like if I am going out, how do you match your top with your jeans, or how you match your dress with your face? Think of colors in the same way, because the principles of colors work the same way across any artistic form. So if your food is very for say commonly, if we look at it, if your food is very orange, then you don't want an orange bowl, because then your food and your bowl are gonna look the same and your food won't stand out. So use something that is, if you're trying to introduce color, then maybe use like orange. Complementary color to orange is blue. So if you had a blue background or a blue bowl, the orange will stand out. So you need to start thinking of food in the same way you would think of anything artistic. Like जैसे आप कपड़े पहनते हैं, तो you have certain ideas that this works good with this, or this works good with this, or this goes well with this. So use those principles again in selecting your props. But again, that is also a skill that you build slowly. So you start with neutrals, like neutral whites and neutral grays. They always work because food will obviously have some color in it, and the whites and grays generally help to bring out the color in food.
Okay, so I think that was our last question, and time's very much up. And time went by fast because it was so informative.